Hi, Palm Bay. I'm Rob Medina, your candidate for mayor. With your support, when elected, we will immediately move forward to take the necessary actions to restore transparency, to restore accountability, responsibility, and the respect of our beloved city. It's evident through recent audit findings and oversights meeting in Tallahassee that our city has engaged in financial decisions that clearly have put our citizens and our financial stability at risk. The headlines of our city once promoted a city that cares, finalists for a City of the Year, and a community with a great future. Now, today, the headlines promote our city as one with escalating crime, an interchange to nowhere, mismanagement, state-imposed audits, and playgrounds closing due to equipment being unsafe. We must stop this downward spiral of our once financial secured, beautiful community. We drive through flooded roads, potholes, and traffic jams. I pledge to you as your next mayor, I will shine light on these past budgets along with the poor decisions made so we can get the answers our citizens deserve and our state leaders demand. I encourage a forensic audit of all our city operations so we can bring all these things to light. This process will not be easy, but our future and that of our children depend on each and every one of us, ensuring accountability, ensuring professionalism, immediately replacing finger pointing, mismanagement, the rubber stamp process that brought this audit upon us. There are many serious questions. The business and residents of our cities deserve a government that they can trust and believe in. It is important to address these issues head on, for they've made a target of ridicule and skepticism from our surrounding neighbors and our very own residents. This will require strong leadership, transparent and sensible policy decisions, and constant commitment to ethical conduct. As mayor, my first goal will be to restore trust in our government. Government for the people, by the people. This is truly an opportunity for leadership by example. And as your mayor, I'll pledge to you that if I vote to approve a contract with a company to do business with our city, I will prohibit myself from receiving any future campaign funds from that said company. And I will encourage our council members to do the same. I believe as elected officials, we're held to a higher standard. The citizens of Palm Bay will be my only priority. We will address the many concerns of the finding of the state audit and encourage the open participation of our residents to provide oversight in our budget process. Hashtag the public trust. For a better Palm Bay, elect Rob Medina. May God bless you. May God continue to bless this great city we call Palm Bay. Hoorah! Hoorah!
Who am I? I'm someone that believes in community and that dedicates hundreds of hours every year to serving the people of Brevard. Who am I? I'm a scholar that supports and believes in education, that donates countless dollars and hours to helping scholars learn, grow, and be better for our future. Who am I? I'm an advocate that stands up for those who can't stand up for themselves and that protects and defends the Constitution every single day. I'm Alton Edmond, and I'm running for Brevard County Sheriff. It's time for change.
For nearly 60 years, most politicians running for office in Palm Bay promised to fix the city's failing roads. In 2017, armed with a plan, Thomas Gaume and a small team of residents set out to accomplish this enormous task.
The need for alternate paths that are smoother than the roads, and the term grassfalt will soon be a distant memory.
Tom believes in duplicating success. He started by visiting Northport, Florida, a GDC community exactly half the size of Palm Bay. Northport successfully fixed their roads with a road bond referendum, and Tom made several trips to Northport to fully understand the process.
In the 2018 election, 66% of Palm Bay voters approved a $150 million bond referendum. Now we're turning our failed roads into an economic engine to diversify our tax base and lure commercial businesses,
while at the same time looking out for the environment and the delicate ecosystem we call home.
That's what sets Thomas Gaume apart. He solves problems by creating teams of citizens to conquer even the most difficult issues. You might say that Tom is the man with a plan. Vote Thomas Gaume for Palm Bay City Council Seat 3 on November 3rd. For your family, your property, and our future.
Approved and paid for by Thomas Gaume for Palm Bay City Council Seat 3 nonpartisan.
Hello, Palm Bay. Randy Foster, candidate for Palm Bay City Council Seat 3. This political advertisement is approved and paid for by Randy Foster, candidate for Palm Bay City Council Seat 3. Public safety is important. As a councilman, that should be the number one priority when you come in office, public safety. And the people who provide that safety, who serve and protect, is Palm Bay Police Department and Palm Bay Fire Department. I went through a 2-hour process for each interview for an endorsement with Palm Bay Police and the Fire Department. The Palm Bay Fraternal Order Police, Lodge 111, endorsed me. Also, Palm Bay Fire Department endorsed me for the City Council Seat 3. My opponent decided not to go in front of them. He decided to go to the Space Coast Association of Realtors. Has nothing to do with public safety, and none of them probably works in Palm Bay. But I would have took the time out if I was him. And here are the men and women that serves and protect and keep you safe at home. So remember this when you go to the polls in November. If your brother, your sister, your uncle, your father, your cousin, your friend is a police officer in Palm Bay or a fighter, my opponent don't care what they're going through as a candidate running for office. I do. That's why they endorse me. Thank you, Palm Bay. And remember, I'm the only one with law enforcement experience and a history of providing safety throughout the public, throughout these United States. Vote randyfoster.com. Vote for Randy Foster, a true leader. Thank you.
A Christian, husband, father, long-term Palm Bay resident, small business owner, real estate investor, builder, humanitarian, has served as executive board member of multiple local non-profit organizations. He's currently serving on the City of Palm Bay Planning and Zoning Board and also the vice chairman of the Palm Bay Park and Recreation Advisory Board. He's experienced in city affairs and ready to go on day one. That's Donnie Felix. He stands for transparency, a strong infrastructure, supporting city staff, first responders, fire and police, diverse and affordable housing, small businesses and good-paying jobs, economic growth and sustainability for Palm Bay, and also a healthy environment for integrity, diversity, and service. Vote for Donnie Felix for Palm Bay City Council C2.
My name is Donnie J. Felix, and I approve this message.
Hello, Palm Bay. I am Kay Mirage, and I'm running to be your next mayor. I currently sit on the Planning and Zoning Board, as well as our Community Development Advisory Board. I'm a mom, I'm a small business owner, and I've been married to my husband, Lynn Volk, for 19 years. And together we have an amazing 17-year-old son who's about to head off to college. Palm Bay needs fresh, bold leadership, one who is an embracer of change, diversity, and inclusion, who is proactive and thinks outside the box. They need to be free from conflicts of interest and owes no favors to the who's who. Our next mayor should be informed and have a true understanding of the issues and be ready with plans to help solve them. They must be open to have dialogue with you and empathize with your concerns. I am that leader. I'm ready to work with council to earn back public trust, bring transparency and accountability to all levels of city government. I am your voice, and I'm that unifying force that is ready to guide our city towards smart growth and a very successful future. For more information, visit palmbayk.com. Vote K Mirage for Palm Bay Mayor. K is the right choice for Palm Bay. I'm K Mirage, and I approve this message.
Good evening, Palm Bay. Welcome to yet another edition of Palm Bay Live. And with me in the studio today is Mr. Phillip Snyder, and he's running for Florida Senate District 17. And I'm going to bring him on the platform right now. So we're going to get started because we have a busy night ahead of us. We have the presidential debates that we have to contend with, and we also have an ongoing City Hall meeting. But I'm aware that folks do come back and watch these videos on YouTube, on our channels before they go out and vote. So we're going to go ahead with the interview tonight. And so, Mr. Snyder, welcome to the platform. How are you doing today, sir?
I'm doing good. I'm feeling like the pregame show to everything else going on in our world.
Yes, I imagine. Again, welcome back to Palm Bay Live. This is your second time around. You were here prior. We did a forum together on racial reform and such. So tonight's forum will be focused on educational reform and climate change. So that's going to be your topic tonight, and that's what we're going to be focusing on. So, sir, get right into it. You hold a master's degree in educational leadership, and as a former educator, you are passionate about education reform. Can you speak about what you experienced as an educator and why it motivates you to seek educational reform?
Yeah, one of the things I tell people is that, as an educator, I had a front row seat to the effect of policy. And so it's all policy, even outside of education, right? I mean, you're looking at students and you're getting insight into their lives. And I'm seeing 150 kids a day. And so one of the things that really drove me into running for this seat in general is knowing that at the state level is where we're going to see education reform, right? So the things that I was experiencing were incredibly low fundings in the school system. The salaries of educators, it's almost like a joke in our society, right? Like underpaid, overworked. But I think it's one of those things that continues to get worse year to year to year. And we are in crisis mode. And all of that low funding, not taking care of our teachers, all that's going to result and is resulting in not taking care of our students and providing the education that they need. We're not providing the safest facilities that they deserve to have. We're not providing long-term educators who are becoming experts in their field because they're leaving within 5 years. And we're not providing, a ecosystem of curriculum and, long-term, like really thinking through what they need to learn. And standardized testing is obviously a mess. So long story short, I just don't think that we've set our students up for a path of success from K through 12. And that's really the reason that I'm running for a state level seat, because I believe we need to have an impact on that.
Okay, great. Why did you leave the teaching profession, sir? Did you leave the teaching profession? Yes.
Yeah, so I left back in 2018, and that was easily one of the hardest decisions I had to make. And ultimately, I was put in a spot where I had to choose between education and the students I had there, and then the students I have at home. Me and my wife were a single income family, and after our second son was born, we weren't making it. And so I had my master's. I was interviewing for assistant principal jobs, not necessarily because I wanted to be an administrator, but really because I needed the pay bump, right? And I know so many people who end administration for that same reason. And I was offered a job at a nonprofit doing human resources work for more money than an assistant principal, with essentially less time, because principals put in a lot of hours. And so me and my wife did quite a bit of prayer, and we made the decision that that's where the Lord was leading us. But it was tough, Kevin. I remember actually being in the parking lot over at Hammock Landings on the phone with one of my really good friends, essentially going through like what it felt like was like a quarter life crisis. You know what I mean? Like I thought I was going to die an educator, and here I was not even able to stay in the field that I loved.
Gotcha. All right. Why is educational reform so important to you, sir?
Education is the foundation of our society. I think that's just a fact. We're all products of our public education system. The coworkers we have, right? The police officers we have, the fire department, like everything begins with us being trained up in the public education system. And so if that cornerstone of our society isn't rock solid, then we're setting ourselves up for so many failures in other parts of our society. And so I just believe that it's because it's so foundational to our society that it's crucial for reform. And I guess that question also implies, like, you know, I obviously see issues in the education system, and I've addressed some of them, and I'm assuming we're going to address a little bit more as we go. But you know, the fact that I'm seeing these issues, and I don't think they're just little problems. Like, if I could just establish that now, I believe the issues that the Florida education system has are on the verge of, and some are in, genuine crisis mode. And I'm not trying to be melodramatic, and I understand how maybe ridiculous that could sound to someone who's not in the education field, but I believe that we've hit crisis mode on some of these issues.
So let's talk about one of the issues that I noticed. Talk about the issue of underfunding, and why this is causing a teacher shortage in the state.
Yeah. So Education Week, the really respected educational publication, published this Quality Matters survey. I say survey, you know, really just a result of a year-long study that they do for every state in the nation. And, you know, we got a lot of kudos because we went from the 4th ranked state to the 3rd ranked state as far as, you know, quality of education. And that is something to brag about. You know, student achievement in Florida is really high, and we should be excited about that. We received an F in funding. We have some of the lowest funding per pupil. We have some of the lowest funding for facilities, and we have some of the lowest funding for educators. We do not put our money into our education system. And I'm just going to say it. I believe that if we were adequately funding our schools, we would be #1 in the nation. We have the potential.
Okay.
We have amazing teachers. We have amazing students, but we are not funding it properly.
Okay. All right. So goes back to my next question now. So why is teacher retention so important?
Yeah. So I explained it this way, right? So think about most any industry. You know, you'd expect the employees in the industry to essentially make a bell curve. You know, you have a bunch of employees at the beginning of their career. Most of the employees are in the midst of their career. And then you have some employees who are nearing the end of their career. And this creates a healthy ecosystem of employment, right? You constantly have this, like, you know, turnover because you have people retiring. And, you know, of course, you have some people who leave the profession early. But you have this bulk of mentorship and development that comes from your, you know, that mid-range of teachers, right? They know enough to know what not to do, and they're comfortable enough to still, and they haven't been there long enough so they can still innovate, right? This is the backbone of your workforce. Education is becoming a reverse bell curve, right? So, you know, you go into a lot of schools today. I can tell you for sure the schools that I worked at, and, you know, research is showing the same thing. You see, you know, decent amount of teachers at the beginning of their career, but that 5 to 20 year mark, right? That should be way up here. It's kind of flatlining, and soon it's gonna. The average teacher leaves the profession within 5 years. And so you have a bunch of teachers in the beginning of their career and a lot of teachers waiting to retire. And every year we consistently have more teachers leave the profession through retirement and you know, job changes that we aren't keeping up. We go into every single school year with dozens, if not over 100 empty teaching positions. And it gets worse every year.
And I had an interview with Phil Moore the other day, and I kind of pointed out to him that I don't know if everybody has noticed this, but we have to import a lot of teachers from other countries. I don't know if you realize that, but that's happening in the state. We import teachers from the Caribbean countries. They come in, they fill the slots, and they're here, and they, you know, we try to retain them in those slots because, you know, they will come in for little or nothing.
Yeah, I can't say I know any statistics on you know, importation teachers, but I wouldn't be surprised. And one of the things that you see too is Florida is, and I wrote a blog on this actually. You know, Florida, unfortunately, has historically been very short-sighted in its education policies, right? So the last time we experienced an issue with, you know, open teaching positions, we just lowered the standards to become a teacher.
I got you.
That's not a good idea, right? I mean, that may fix your problem in the short term. It may make certain numbers on a spreadsheet look better, but that's not long-term healthy for the state and its education system, right? So, but we consistently do that. As a state, historically, our legislator has been very short-sighted. Oh, this seems like a problem right now. What are we going to do to fix it fast? The teachers and advocates for teachers have been talking about low teacher pay for a long time. And so we have this new bill, that was, pushed through by Governor DeSantis and the Republican legislator. And I'm not totally opposed to this bill. I mean, any progress for teacher pay is progress, right? But the bill is essentially that school districts are supposed to raise their minimum starting pay to $47,500 a year for new teachers.
That's actually my next follow-up question. So tell me, while you're talking, where did that fall short? Where did his signature on his bill fall short? Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, well, first, it's just not enough anyways. $47,500 is still not enough to be an educator. But let's just put that aside. Let's just assume it was enough. It's only for new teachers. So that's problem one, right? If I were still teaching, I'd be on year 6, and I'd still not have broken $40,000 a year. And teachers with no experience, right, would be coming in potentially with more money than I am. Now, that's obviously going to cause a huge issue for a lot of reasons I'm not going to spell out, because all of our viewers are intelligent enough to read into the problems that can create. I mean, honestly, you make more money by just leaving, doing another job for a year, than coming back. But the second thing is the state's not providing adequate funding to actually meet those goals. They're telling the school districts to do it. And the school district has been telling the union that they can't do it for so long because they don't have the money, right? And so you haven't actually fixed a problem. You've just told someone else to fix the problem. And in the legislation, essentially school districts have an out if they can just say they got as close as they could, right? And so you've created something that you can create a headline around that says, I've raised teacher pay to $47,500 a year. But contextually, there really hasn't been significant legislation around this.
Okay, how can we increase it to $50,000? And how, if you elected, how would you work to make sure that we can meet that standards, meet that mandatory minimum starting salary for teachers?
Yeah, so I believe, and you kind of alluded to it, I believe that teachers' salary needs to start at $50,000 a year, and I believe that every teacher in the state's salary should be bumped up to $50,000 a year. That's going to create issues with contraction, but I believe those are better problems to have than the problems we currently have, right? I mean, at the end of the day, we have almost 2 decades worth of poor legislation that have created problems. We can't expect, a magic wand to come fix it all. So I think this is a way to get us to a plane where we'd have better problems to fix. So once we do that, or excuse me, I should say, how I plan to do that is I'm going to propose a corporate tax in the state, low, about 1 to 1.5% corporate tax. These are not small businesses. These are organizations generally with 1,000 employees or more, and just simply a tax on their revenue to pay for this initiative. It's very hard to calculate how much money is exactly needed because all of our districts report independently and our teacher numbers are fluctuating. And so that is a number that, frankly, I'd have to be working closely with economists at our state to ensure that we get the right percentage to do that. And I just want to be very transparent because I'm not one of those people that goes around making promises, right? That's not a promise, that's a goal. And that's something that at the end of the day, I'd have to have other senators and other people at the other side of the aisle in the House of Representatives who, define a middle ground where they could get behind that. If other tax options are proposed, I'm against raising taxes on individuals and households, but if we can find other tax revenue that can pay for it, I'd be open to that. But the idea that I'd be bringing to the table would be taxing corporations.
So how will we ensure that the school districts do not carry the burden of coming up with the money?
Well, I mean, so that's where you'd have a state tax on corporations, and then the state would distribute those taxes to districts based on the amount of funds that they need. And honestly, that's something that you probably delegate to the Department of Education to work through, right? Because the way government works is the legislator, which I'm attempting to get voted into, creates policy with broad parameters, and then it's executed by bureaucracies like the Department of Education. And so they'd have to work through how to ensure that money gets funneled properly. They'd have to work through all the applications that the Brevard County and Indian River County would have to apply to get that money. So that isn't something that would be over my purview. Frankly, I wouldn't know nearly enough to do that.
Okay. You also want to prioritize and listen to the voice of teachers. How will you do this, sir?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's not hard because teachers are incredibly vocal. I think it's frustrating to know that we have so many legislators who don't even make themselves available. There are certain legislators in our own area, and I don't need to say any names. I think people can probably guess who, where it's either impossible to get a hold of that person, or it's impossible to get that person to listen, right? And I think we all know the difference between being heard and being listened to, right? And so I think this comes down to the type of person you are. I am the type of person that I just like to listen, I like to understand, and I like to seek to understand others. And so bringing that personality into this position, I think, is key. But then on some practical ways, I do think that we need to ensure that we are, creating commissions and task forces at the state level that incorporate teacher voices to allow them to direct and influence policy, right? Task forces that can be assigned to look at problems, create recommendations for legislators to take and tackle, and ensuring that they're consistently invited to the table. And I really want to say, I'm not just talking about unions, because I think sometimes when we talk about teacher voices, we think just unions. I was a teacher for a long time. I'm not saying I'm opposed to unions, but I was not a union member, and it didn't mean that my voice didn't count. And so just ensuring that we're inviting all teachers to the tables and not just union representatives. Again, nothing against union representatives. The idea, right, is for a collective voice to get out, but ensuring that we're inviting all teachers to those task forces.
Okay. Aside from salary and teacher retention, what are some of the other areas within education that needs to be reformed?
I thought you were going to say that needs to be funded, and I had a story. I'm just going to tell the story because it kind of indicates something that I do want to talk about. So I was first year teacher at Palm Bay High School, and I loved my time there. So I think it was a teacher work day, and I'm sitting in my classroom, grading papers and everything, and 2 county employees came in, and they went to, the AC vent that was near the floor off to the corner of the classroom. I was like, that's exciting. I'm going to get a new air filter, right? And so they take out this air filter, and Kevin, I cannot describe how gross this thing was, right? I mean, we're talking like an inch of dirt in this, but the filter was actually too large for the hole, so the bottom of it was fairly clean, because air hadn't been flowing through that. And I wish I was kidding. They knocked it off into a trash can, flipped it up so the clean sliver was on the top, I guess now, and they put it back in. And I said something. I was like, "Are you? I don't mean to offend you, but are you kidding me? I mean, can you just give me like a new filter?" And they gave me the, "Hey, look, we have a directive that we only have so many filters that we can replace. We've seen ones that are worse than this, so that kind of thing." And I'm not gonna make somebody else's life harder, so I didn't really debate with them. But I'm sitting here thinking, like, these are my kids, my students. This is me. Like, I'm breathing this. They're breathing this.
Put it back in there.
They put it back in there, yes. And they tell me that they're essentially the only 2 Brevard County employees in the whole county that do that particular job. There's the AC department is pretty small, and I guess like there's just 2 of them. And I'm sitting here thinking, like, you guys do the whole school district, right? Like, I mean, Brevard County is like 45 miles long, and it's so many schools. Well, okay. I think that communicates the point, right? And I get that's anecdotal, but I don't think it's a stretch for anyone to believe that our school system's infrastructure, the buildings, the AC, the route, like the things that are supposed to keep our students safe and operating in a healthy environment are not adequate. And a lot of times, not all the time, but a lot of times, the schools that are the oldest and are the least prepared are in lower income communities in our area. And so, I mean, University Park Elementary is a great example of that. A school with amazing teachers and amazing administration. Love University Park Elementary. But, I get a chance to volunteer there and do some work with my church. And I mean, it's just a school that's old, and at the end of the day, age is age, right? You can only put so much, lipstick on a pig. Is that what they say? And so we have to be willing to put money into the buildings that our students, walk around and live in essentially for 7 hours, sometimes more a day, and then that kind of ekes out into this other new infrastructure that we're all living in this pandemic, which is, the infrastructure behind, the computer systems and the e-learning that we do. There's a lot that needs to be improved there. And I think the state could do a better job standardizing some things. And I use that word carefully because standardized in education tends to not make people happy. But, I think we all probably know a high schooler or two that's using like 8 different computer programs to get work done, right? I think the state can use its larger buying power to acquire software, like Canvas, that can be used across the state to provide students a streamlined learning experience and really reduce the amount of work and effort to access learning, right? The goal isn't, the students shouldn't be spending time accessing learning. They should be spending time learning. And so I think those are some other things that we can improve on. So I think you had also asked about other areas of education reform, and I kind of talked about infrastructure. Right. But obviously I'd be silly not to mention standardized testing.
Well,
we have a testing.
My next question.
Yeah. Our testing structure, I think, again, I think we're almost talking like common sense now, right? Like, I don't know many Floridians, if any Floridians, who've ever said, wow, those standardized tests really capture the essence of student knowledge.
What are the pros and cons of the standardized tests? Since you're right there, where my next question is, what are the pros and cons?
Yeah, so standardized testing comes from, standardized tests allow you to provide measurement, right? So the idea is that you want someone who gets high school diploma at Bayside High School, somewhere in Brevard, let's just say, a high school in Brevard, you want them to show that they have the same competencies and aptitudes as someone as a high school in Orange County or Broward County or whatever. And the best way to do that is through standardized testing. Standardized testing is convenient, and it allows you to feel like things are being measured. The problem is that there's not a lot of research linking success in the standardized tests that we see to genuine lifelong success, right? Because a lot of the attributes that go into lifelong success, shocking as it is, are not things like geometry or being able to parse through the words of Shakespeare. And I'm not saying those aren't valuable skills. I taught English. Let's parse through some Shakespeare, but the things like grit, the ability to continue to work through a problem even when the solution is not readily available. I mean, we're old enough, Kevin, to know that those people are probably going to be successful, right? The ones who can continue to days later, still willing to work hard and solve a problem and not quit early. Problem solving in general, critical thinking. So we need, ideally, right? So we're talking perfect world, really hard to achieve this. We're ideally, we're going to have some form of testing structure that can help us not just understand, someone's base level knowledge and recollection skills, but dig deeper into things like their aptitudes in, self-discipline and grit. And the problem is those are things that are just really difficult to measure. And so when you're faced with a challenge like that, our state legislator and most around the nation have opted instead to go for something that's easy to measure, right? And so that's kind of like the pros and the cons, and the issue that's created. I propose, that we look at more larger nationalized tests. Think using things that already exist and are already understood as good metrics. SAT, ACT, for example, using those more at the high school level, for testing out of school and those kind of things, and to start moving away from leaning into standardized tests as a way of gauging student success, but allowing teachers the freedom to discern based on pretty detailed competencies, whether or not these students are ready for the next grade, whether or not they've mastered these competencies and those kind of things. And really, it kind of speaks to my philosophy as a whole, as moving education in the direction of what's applicable for life versus what's just good for theory. The very idea that I got out of high school, having done Algebra 2 and never done personal finance is ridiculous, right? I ended up teaching English and I work in human resources. I don't remember what I learned in Algebra 2, and I probably don't need it. I use personal finances every single month when I do my budget, right? And we all do. And so, moving high school to allow more options for trade, to allow more options for work study, at companies and in professions that students might be interested in. If someone's interested in the medical field in 10th grade, they should be able to apply for programs that don't just let them go to college early, which are great programs, but also that would allow them to, on school time, go work in a doctor's office, right? To understand and be a part of that environment and just start to broaden their horizons earlier. And I think those are things that our community wants. I know they're things parents want, and I know they're things that our students want. And it makes sense.
Okay. All right. If you're just joining us, I'm speaking to Mr. Phillip Snyder. He is a Florida Senate candidate for District 17, state of Florida, here in Brevard County. And we're on the topic of educational reform and climate change. And I know tonight we have a low turnout in audience size because we're competing with the presidential debate, and we have an ongoing city hall meeting that's ongoing, but I'm pretty aware that folks go back and watch these videos. So we decided to continue on with the programming. So you set up the next question for me is, should school funding and teacher salaries be linked to standardized tests? Why or why not?
I think long term, that's an option. I don't think we should take it off the table, but we need a long-term education plan. Right now, you're only going to hurt yourself if you take standardized tests that no one that I know truly believes in and ties it to financial incentive to schools and teachers. It just doesn't make sense. You again, we lead to all the problems we already know exist, the teaching to the test, and gearing your whole school ecosystem around a test. And you're not doing anyone any favors. Would it be different if we had a test that collectively as a state, everyone from our community to our educational leaders to our students, if we had a test that we believed in, that we felt was really representative, I think it would be different. But right now, we're doing more harm than good.
Okay. You want to greatly reduce class size. Why is this important? And answer this for me while you answer, when you're thinking about that question, is with a short of teachers, is this possible? And how do a smaller class size impact children?
Yeah, so let's just take a moment and let's just reflect on the fact that, I think in one of my blogs, I use this analogy of like a leaky roof. If you don't address it, it continuously gets worse and worse and worse, right? And we just need to understand that we're at a point where we've had this like leaky roof in Florida for a very long time as it pertains to growing class sizes and underpaid teachers. And it's a really bad spot right now. And so, Kevin, you bring up a great point. How are we supposed to reduce class sizes when we have a teacher shortage, right? And so as I propose a solution, just know that there's no good solution to that. because we're trying to fix a problem in one legislation swoop, but it's a problem that's been 2 decades in the making, right? So just, we all need to be adults and understand that you don't fix something like that quick. So essentially what you have to do is you have to incentivize teachers to stay in the profession. That's step one. It comes before reducing class sizes. You can't reduce class sizes until you keep your teachers that you have. And then after you keep your teachers you have, you incentivize new teachers. So one of the things that you would see if on my website is, I indicate that long-term, I would like to offer bonuses for minority educators to get more minority educators into the profession. Research indicates that if students are learning from teachers who look like them, they're more inclined to stay in education through to graduation. And that's specific for, some of our demographics that have the lowest graduation rates, like African-American males, for example. And so bringing in a more diverse teaching workforce after we've reduced the turnover. So just, it's a multi-step process. But if we're following the steps, if we raise teacher pay to $50,000 a year and we're beginning to listen to teachers, so we're not seeing the same turnover levels, and we create incentives for, minority teachers to enter the profession, and then I believe we're going to start to see a trend upwards, and we could begin to address class sizes. Now, you asked, why is class size important? First, I could just say there's ample research indicating that students who are learning in class sizes of a certain size are, inclined to retain significantly more information, have higher levels of satisfaction, and perform better both behaviorally and academically. Now, what that class size is very much dependent on the age group, the subject matter being taught, right? It just looks different than from a kindergarten classroom to like a 11th grade orchestra classroom, right? So I think we could understand that. My proposal is that we would be working with the researchers to ensure that we have different class size requirements for different grade levels and for different subject matters. But just from a really practical level, just if you guys could imagine you're a teacher and imagine trying to teach 15 teenagers, a certain content, and 30 teenagers, and just imagine the differences, imagine the struggles that would come from a class that was double in size, right? And so I did, for the record, I taught classes. I had a few that were shockingly small, like 12 to 18, just because the way scheduling worked out. But most of the classes I taught were 25 to 30. And I will tell you right now, nearly every year, my smallest classes perform better than all my other classes. And I was the same teacher with the same lesson plans. But, you have significantly more behavioral issues. When you have 27 kids, 30 kids, 6 hands go up for a question. Getting through all the questions, but honestly, it's like half your class, it feels like some days. So it's just understanding there's a very practical element. And I think it's a lot of common sense that bigger classes means you're going to learn less because you're splitting your attention as an educator. Does that answer your question, Kevin?
Yeah, it does. All right. You would like to eliminate personal finance courses in school?
Eliminate?
Implement. Implement.
Yeah, implement.
Can you tell us why this is important?
Yeah. We all have personal finances.
Okay.
You know what I mean? It's like that simple.
So okay, I got it. All right.
Yeah.
All right.
And it just let me just say about that. It just speaks to the fact that right now we do not have an education philosophy that says we're going to teach people what they need to be successful in life. Mm-hmm. Because if we did, this wouldn't even be a conversation, right? But we currently don't have that.
Currently, we have no, because I remember when I went to high school, this was in the 90s. Okay. I did have personal finance classes. We had that as an option. So I remember there was a couple electives, right? So you had you can go into the moms and babies class and go learn about
home ec,
home ec, right? You have that, or you can go into the business class and learn about balancing the checkbook. And of course, I went into the business class and learned about balancing the checkbook and how to take care of that need. So you
Hey,
say
learning how to take care of babies is important too, Kevin.
now, I'm not saying it doesn't, but,
Yeah, no,
but everybody
I
has
get
an
it.
option. So
Yeah, I
at
get it.
that
Yeah.
time, so are you saying that doesn't exist right now? Those
No,
options?
it doesn't. It doesn't. So you could take just so you guys know, if you are a student or parent of a student, students can take personal finance on Florida Virtual School, and there might be a high school or two around here that gets to offer it, but it's not a course that's required to be offered by schools, and it's not a course that many students will have the option to take or even know to look for.
So it's pretty elective.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's exactly coded as an elective. Maybe it's a replacement for a math class. I'd have to look into that specifically. But I'm proposing that it should be available to every student. And there should be and again, the key is that it's a movement of philosophy. It's moving from well, you're obviously going to take geometry next to well, you're obviously going to take personal finance next, right? Not saying geometry is not important. I do woodworking on my own, and I use geometry quite a bit. But we understand that for most people, hopefully we're all going to be in a position where we are earning some form of income, and we need to be able to understand how to, I say balance a checkbook, but
yeah, I understand what you mean.
Use your online bank account,
yeah,
but understand basic things like when I taught high school, these are questions that students would ask me, like, Mr. Snyder, what is interest? Right? And these are great questions. Like, they are questions that should be answered for them, and so long story short, a course that goes over that type of content does exist. But for many students, they don't even know it's an option, and they have to go find it online versus it being offered in their schools.
Interesting. Okay, so if any parents out there listening, here goes something that we
can. I just use that as an example of changing the philosophy versus really pounding in personal finance.
You believe that school infrastructures need help but lack funding.
Yeah.
What needs to be repaired, and what is your plan to secure funding?
Yeah. So, at the end of the day, what needs to be repaired is dependent on the school, the age of the school, and those kind of things. I've worked in schools where the AC was in and out. I've actually worked in a lot of schools where the AC was in and out, both in my time as a teacher and my time in volunteering and my time as an education researcher before I was a formal teacher. So AC is, always a big one. But again, there's everything, right? Landscaping, there's, your air filters. Okay, I'm not going to go into this, but you guys get it. Everything independent on the school. That's their infrastructure needs. How you acquire funding, though, that's difficult. Most of the funding for infrastructure currently comes from things like the half-penny sales tax, the half-penny surtax, which is an amendment on our ballot this year, and I vote. I ask you all to vote to continue that because our schools desperately need that funding. And so where we acquire that funding, frankly, I think that a lot of that can probably be found in audits for most of our, I'm just thinking specifically about Brevard County schools. This is one of those areas that there's been a lot of, I'm not an expert on it, so I don't want to speak too much into it. But, my understanding is that there's sometimes times where we just find money, like, oh, we just found this money that we can now do for this teacher raise, if you remember that happened last year. And so I do believe that our school board in Brevard County should experience an audit, and I do think some money comes from that. But at the end of the day, I'm hoping that passing something like a corporate tax can provide funding for both of those things, both teacher pay and infrastructure. But Kevin, if I'm honest, I really don't know where all the funding comes from. If we don't do something like an increased tax on like the surtax, it's difficult. And just so everyone knows why I'm kind of stumbling through this, right? Generally, your education funding, everything comes from different kind of like revenue
pools,
streams, right? And so, money that's, for example, in the surtax that we're voting on, it's earmarked for things like infrastructure, and so it can't go to things like teacher pay. And so that's just something that I'm going to have to talk to experts on And probably, Kevin, that's probably a question that I'm going to be going forth and saying, look, this is the problem. Where do we get the funding from?
Okay, I got you. Talk about inequality in education, sir. There are students who don't have access to safe and quality education.
Yeah.
What will you do to change this?
Yeah, I will say, I just want to start with, education inequality is an issue everywhere in the United States. Florida is better than most states. And so I want to give credit where credit is due. That generally, we don't see the same levels of income inequality. Ironically, probably because we're just not giving anyone money. So everyone has the same. Anyways, and so I think the biggest things that we need to be doing is we need to be ensuring that we're looking at the numbers that we use for what we consider a low-income student, right? Sometimes what happens is that number is actually like too low, right? Maybe like we're saying their parents' income needs to be here, but you have parents kind of above that mark, that because of their circumstances should be also considered low-income students, and they aren't. And so they aren't receiving services that they could get. So that could be an issue, but I think that's generally a minority. The biggest way to address income or education inequality is to address education and online education infrastructure in low-income areas. One of the reasons that you get higher levels of education inequality in certain areas is because those schools receive less attention. And also, we believe that long-term, we should be incentivizing teachers to stay at low-income schools. So I worked at both a low-income school and a school that would not be considered low-income during my time, and I made the same amount of money either way. And frankly, teaching at a low-income school is harder. It is, right? And so a lot of times what happens, just a little bit of insight into the teaching profession, many teachers end up starting at low-income schools. It's kind of where they begin their career. It's usually the schools that have open teaching positions. You're working with, a larger group of newer teachers and a large group of saints, like just teachers who have been willing to stay voluntarily in low-income schools for a while. But then you also do work with, a number of teachers who, maybe are kind of in the middle of that career and aren't as driven to move the profession forward. Because what ends up happening is as you perform really well in a low-income school, you tend to get offered or provide chances to leave that school and to go to a nicer, wealthier, easier to teach at school. And honestly, after 2 to 3 years in a really tough environment, teachers take that. Because at the end of the day, I mean, like nothing's changing. I might be teaching the same subject, or I'm making the same amount of money, whether I'm teaching at this school that, whatever is nicer.
Mm-hmm.
And so unfortunately, what ends up happening is we end up driving a lot of our best teachers to our wealthiest schools where they don't have, as always, the same level of need. And so we believe that we should be incentivizing teachers through, whether it be like an annual bonus for teaching at a school that has, this level of, low-income students or something like that. And so I believe, in our proposal, we propose a $5,000 bonus. That's probably shooting high, but we always dream high. And again, that's a long-term thing, right? Because if you hear anything about my education plan and goals, you just have to see dollar signs. And I just want to remind everyone who's seeing a lot of dollar signs right now that we are rated an F in school funding. And so dollar signs are the natural, if you don't, we've all probably heard this, probably maybe in a church service or something like that. Maybe a pastor or someone said something like this: I can tell you what you care about if you show me 2 things. Your calendar, where you spend your time, and your bank account, where you spend your money. And if Florida was to be audited that way, if they were to look at how we collectively as a state and our state legislators spend their time and how we as a state spend our state budget, would anyone look at our state and say, wow, they care about education? The answer is no. And so moving that philosophy to one that acknowledges the importance of education will be expensive.
Okay. All right, let's keep it moving. We are up 50 minutes before the 9 o'clock hour. How has the COVID-19 pandemic impacted the educational system in Florida?
Yeah, well, so good news, by the way. The predictions about the spread of COVID, weren't exactly accurate, and so COVID-19 is not spreading as rampantly in schools as we expected. So that's just like a huge praise. I'm really excited about that. So there's that. But one of the things it's done is it's moved a lot of students. So in case you don't know, Florida as a state requires all schools to have their doors open 5 days a week. So teachers, they have to still teach in person. But most districts like Brevard provide options for parents and students to have an online learning experience. But here's the key, because funding is all about funding. Let's just say you're high school A, and if you have these 500 students who want to do online education, but if they all go to Florida Virtual School, you lose funding. So instead, what high schools have really been required to do is offer like a hybrid learning situation for students in order to ensure that school counts stay up. For teachers, that means that many teachers are teaching a class in person with a camera somewhere in the room, streaming to a group of kids. I actually don't think this could be, a terrible idea. I think maybe long-term, this could be something great if teachers were trained in it, if they had the right software, if they had the right technology. I actually think this is something that could stick around as a potential great way to meet the learning needs of students. But, our teachers are stinking heroes, and they're trying to put this together kind of ad hoc, because this was no one was ever trained for this. And so I think our teachers and administrators are doing a really good job. But at the end of the day, we have a huge problem, which is we have teachers and students who are trying to learn in a hybrid environment where students have not been trained to be learners in that environment. Teachers have not been trained to be instructors in that environment. And our technology infrastructure and our physical infrastructure have not been set up to facilitate that environment. So that's kind of the biggest issue that COVID-19 has created for education system. I don't know what the most recent reports are for teacher turnover. I think we'll see by the end of the year if teachers endure during this time. I'm concerned that we may see higher levels of teacher turnover than even in years past due to this, but I'm hoping not.
Let's move to school safety, Phillip, so we can pick up the pace on these answers. How can we ensure that our students stay safe in school? We have the COVID-19 situation going on right now. We got shootings that has happened in the past, and violence naturally does happen in the schools. So how can we ensure that students stay safe in schools?
Yeah, it almost feels like a good chunk of my master's degree was just on student safety. The thing you have drilled into you as an administrator is, when in doubt, do what's safe for the students, like no matter what. But the problem is schools don't exist in a vacuum. Think about the high school near you, and that high school, that elementary school near you, that middle school near you. It doesn't just exist on an island off the shore of Florida, right? It's in the middle of our communities. And so we as a community have to do things collectively and understand that those safety precautions will get into our schools. So those are things like, collectively, we're slowing the spread of COVID as a community by wearing masks and social distancing. And, when able to, we're doing things like working remote and, not, going to incredibly large gatherings, right? So by keeping our community safe in this way, those safety precautions are naturally going to make our schools safer. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
As it pertains to things like shootings, this is especially dear to me. I was an education researcher in an elementary school when Sandy Hook happened, and I was teaching at Bayside High School. I was teaching 10th graders when 17 students were murdered at Parkland. And so it's really difficult sorry, I think I'm even a little emotional right now. It's really difficult to have conversations with students about this, right? Like to look at a kid who is trying to learn, but they're holding their backpack and they're doing this because yesterday there was a school shooting and they heard on Instagram or Snapchat that there might be one, you know what I mean? And so at the end of the day, if we're not implementing legislation that keeps our community safer, then our schools won't be safer no matter what we do. We can't make our schools prisons. And so, I believe in common sense gun reform, nothing crazy and radical, but, things like continuing the waiting periods on purchasing a firearm, continuing the raising the age of owning a weapon to 21. I do believe in red flag laws and implementing those to ensure that people can report those who, they have an outlet to report people that they believe are going to be a threat to themselves or the community. And I mean, in universal background checks, of course, ensuring that, goodness gracious, I have to do more to get a driver's license and buy a car, right? And so ensuring that we are making sure that people who own these weapons are licensed and have proper background checks. So those are kind of the things, and you can find out more about that particular topic. I don't want to hijack the conversation there, but I just think it's a silly conversation to say, how do we keep our schools safer if we're not worried about keeping our communities in general safer, right? And this also gets into things like police reform. For the record, when I say that, I believe our police departments need more funding to do things like psychological evaluations and annual, diversity training, and provided with more pay, staffing, and resources they need to do their jobs with less stress. And so those are just a few things that I believe that we can do to keep our schools safer. But
you talk about psychological training and for police officers and all that good stuff. Let's talk about kids for a second. COVID-19 is happening. Majority of the kids are home. They're not socializing with their peers. So there's a big piece of the chunk of their childhood life that's missing right there. No socialization. What can we do, or what will you do as a legislature to ensure that we bridge that gap to make sure we meet their needs while they're quarantining, quote unquote?
Sure. Well, I don't know that a majority of students are quarantining, so I don't know what the current statistics for Brevard and Indian River County are for how many students are, remote learning versus in-person learning. So it could be a majority, but I don't think so. And I don't think so based on anecdotes of talking to teachers. So I don't have any hard facts. But I do think it's a great question. Like, what do we do to ensure, the social health of our students is an important question during this time. I don't know if legislation is really the place to accomplish that. I think that's something that parents need to ensure that they're providing for their students. I think that there's levels like on what legislation could do. And I haven't thought of or considered any legislation that would, during this time specifically, provide more social interaction for students. I think legislation is more to provide safety, but parents should be deciding what level of social interaction they want their students to have and what that kind of looks like. So I know that's a little bit dodgy, but I just don't think it's a legislation question.
Okay. All right. Let's move on to climate change, sir. We're up against time, but we're going to try to run these.
Let's just solve climate change in like 15 minutes. We got this. Let's go.
That would be cool, right?
You're good.
Do that. That would be cool. Yeah. Is climate change one of the most important issues out, facing us today in today's world? Do you believe that? Okay. Why?
For sure. Well, I haven't found a single person on Earth who isn't affected by the climate. That's why. There's 9 billion people on Earth. And, I think that one of the things that we do so well in America, and I think such a really positive thing generally, is we embrace individual freedoms. And I think that that's a really good thing. But nothing is ultimately good if you take it to the extreme. And so valuing personal freedoms above the collective destruction of everyone else, right? It's probably not a good thing. And so in the same way, we need to understand that climate change, I mean, at the end of the day, if you're a climate change denier and watching this, you are not going to believe me that climate change is real. And so, I respect you and I love you and I care about you. And so we could talk about how we can provide economic benefits through addressing climate change. But at the end of the day, climate change is real, and it's the only thing that affects every single one of the 9+ billion people on Earth. And so that's why it's one of the biggest issues that anyone should be talking about, just because of the sheer number of people it affects.
How can Palm Bay, as a community, or Brevard County, or your district as a whole, reduce our carbon footprint?
Yeah, so one of the things that me and my wife really believe in is we believe by leadership by example. And so, really early on, right after we had kind of, well, I guess right before we officially declared that we were running, but when we were, collecting a team, we moved over to solar energy for our home, and we moved over to an electric vehicle. Those are two ways that not everyone, but some people can go ahead and start moving in that direction. And I believe that the state should be providing incentives from the state level to purchase electric vehicles and solar panels and at-home batteries for your house. And I strongly believe that we should be passing legislation that provides incentives for small businesses to grow around the industry of solar panel installation, solar panel maintenance, electric vehicle charging stations, right? And so I just think this is something that at some point people, I think are realizing that electric vehicles and solar panels are kind of where we're going anyways. It just makes sense. Even if you, again, don't believe in climate change, that's fine. Let's just talk about non-renewable energies like fossil fuels are by definition non-renewable. And therefore jobs attached to non-renewable energies are by definition on the clock. They're going to go away, right? If we just run this to its logical conclusion, we're going to get all the oil and coal there is. It's going to happen, right? And so doesn't it just make more sense to move to an industry that is by definition non-renewable? I mean, just think about solar. When the sun stops shining, there's bigger problems, right? And so, I just think that in the Sunshine State, we should have a robust small business economy built up around, solar panel sales and solar panel advertising and solar panel installation and maintenance. And that's something that, again, by definition, it's not going to go away.
Okay,
right?
so let's talk about low-income families, because I understand your plan. Yes. So let's talk about how low-income families would be included in this plan. I mean, how would we reach them with this new plan?
So that's one of the things that's really tough for me, right? Me and my wife, we're pretty standard mid, low, middle class. And so we were able to make that jump by making some financial sacrifices. We sold both cars to go to one electric vehicle, that kind of thing. But it's impractical to say that everyone in our community can do that. And so that really means that we have plenty of families in our community who want to have the benefits of renewable energy, but currently have a financial barrier from getting there. Eventually that'll change, but now there's an issue. So what I believe in is I would love to see incentives for our local municipalities, right? So that's Brevard or Palm Bay, Melbourne, Cocoa cities, to be able to apply for grants to the Department of Energy at the state, and have the state incentivize them to invest in what's called community solar. So in case you're not familiar, what community solar is usually there's a piece of land, or it could be over a public park, or even on a park, the building of one of the park structures. But solar panels are installed, and the energy collected from the solar panels goes to all the homes in that area, and then the electric bills for all those homes would be reduced because during the day they're using solar panels. So really, for the low-income families in question, they wouldn't really notice much of a difference, except their electric bill gets smaller, which is huge, right? I mean, just for the monthly budgeting of families who are not making enough, doing something to drop their electric bill is huge. That's just the economic impact. But then we talk about of course, the environmental and climate impact. And, those homes are not consuming energy from electric plants and stuff that are polluting our environment, and using non-renewable resources, right? They're collecting energy from the sun. And so those solar community models are not currently really being used here in the state of Florida in any large quantity. I don't actually know if we have one yet. And so I'd want to be passing legislation that incentivizes cities to do that. And so the city would manage the solar panels.
They're pretty much talking about solar farms, right?
Yeah, so solar farms are a little different. Usually they're controlled by much larger organizations, and then sold collectively out, versus community solar. But a similar idea. And there's a website called energysage.com that you can use as a great article on what community solar is. And they even talk about the software that's used. It's called, it doesn't matter, or virtual metering, V-metering. To track, but again, that's way too granular for this. Long story short, I think that's a great way to get solar into low-income communities so they can get the economic benefits of it, without having any worry about any upfront cost for it.
Okay. You also talked about electric vehicles, home battery backup systems.
Yeah.
Have you outlined a plan to implement those initiatives?
So we would just be mimicking other states that utilize an incentive program. So you would just apply for the incentive through the state when you purchase a vehicle, show proof of purchase, and then so this would be a kind of a big deal in a sense of how our tax structure works, because most tax incentives in most states comes from their state income tax, and because we don't have a state income tax, we would just have to have a special filing form where essentially you could apply and then the state would reimburse you whatever the incentive is. But I mean, that would just be if you purchase solar panels or electric vehicle or home battery.
All right. I think you talked about how you will support residents.
For the record, I should say we want to pay for that with a tax on fossil fuels, right? Which probably is common sense, but just in case it's not.
All right. I think that answers my other question. Okay.
Yeah.
What types of jobs and small business incentives will be created and offered?
So the small business incentives would just be low interest to no interest loans, to get started, right? Solar panels, installation, it just has a high upfront cost, like a lot of small businesses. But as you can imagine, anything where you get into roofing, it just costs more. And so the goal of creating, low to no interest small business loans doesn't really cost the state much of anything except the risk. But it moves solar panels away from what the current Florida path is that essentially the solar panel business is going to be owned by FPL and other large electrical companies, right? And so, I think we've all kind of learned our lesson that we don't want large companies controlling entire industries. I think we know that small businesses are better for our local communities, right? When I pay my FPL bill, it goes somewhere, but when, I shop local, my money stays local and it benefits my local community. And so when we had solar panels installed, we found some local companies that did solar panel installation, but they didn't do residential solar. They did pool solar, for water and those kind of things. And so if there was any local residential solar, I couldn't find them. And so we ended up having, a company that's based in Orlando come and install. And that really just grinded me. I mean, it was as close as I could get to like local, but it wasn't, I thought it should be really easy, right? To find a company, in my backyard. I'm in the Sunshine State, right? I thought for sure there'd be a dozen companies in my backyard, just waiting to put some solar panels on my roof. But even the companies that market here are generally based elsewhere.
Right. Do you think we'll ever achieve zero emissions in Florida?
I mean, I don't know. I mean, I'm hopeful. I think it makes economic sense. I think it's clearly the best thing for our environment. But it's really going to depend on probably the next 3 elections, because it's not just this election, everyone, right? Like there's going to be midterms in 2 years, and then there's going to be, another general there. And I think that if we're consistently electing officials who are willing to invest in renewable and move us in that direction and grow a small business economy through that, then I think it's possible. I really, really do.
Okay.
But it's a Hail Mary right now, Kevin, if I'm honest. Like it's
Right.
Yeah.
All right, Philip, we've come to the end of the interview. So this is going to be my last time seeing you. I'm going to wish you best of luck in the election. The last time I checked, we had around 34% voting right now in the Brevard County. That's pretty huge, and I'm pretty hopeful that we will achieve 100% voter turnout. I'm praying for that. That would be awesome if everybody just go to the polls, vote. I can't tell you how to vote, but vote your choice. And I would love to see Brevard County achieve 100% voter turnout in our county. So
Did you get out and vote, Kevin? Did you vote?
I haven't voted yet. I've been so busy putting together these interviews. I'm planning to do that tomorrow afternoon when I get off work.
Good.
To go out and vote. So that is going to be my plan. Me and my wife are making a plan to go out tomorrow. But I've been busy putting together these interviews. And speaking about interviews, I have interviews coming up next week with Phil Moore and Scott Fretwell and possibly Mr. Kennedy. So those things are lined up. And then on election day, we will be having an election day show. And I'll have certain guests passing through to give their regards and stuff like that. So watch for those shows that's coming up. They're all starting at 8 o'clock. Well, except for the election day show will start at 6:30 p.m. on November 3rd. Tune in. Folks, this has been fun putting together these shows for the last several months. And we're winding out down to the last several shows for the election cycle. That is, I'll continue these shows, but on a different format because the election cycle will be over at that point in time. So, Mr. Phillip, I'm going to give you the screen so you can tell the voters why they should vote for you. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, I think that a lot of us are just kind of all fed up with, the party system that we currently are operating in. And it's incredibly divisive, and it continues to get that way. And I'm really hoping that we'll see something different tonight with the presidential debate. But my hopes aren't high because we're in a system that feeds divisiveness. But it doesn't have to be that way. And so as a no party affiliate, my goal is to represent our community with unity, embracing the fact that we can disagree and still move towards the same goal, that we can disagree and still talk about each other with respect and dignity. And so if that's a vision that you can get behind as well, I absolutely ask that you vote for me, Phillip Snyder. But learn more about my platform, Snyder2020.org. I'm a teacher at heart, and so we try to flesh it out as much as possible. You can use the contact information on the website to reach right out to me. And if you have any questions about our platform or our stances, you let me know, and I'll answer them. Thank you so much for your time. And either way, no matter what, go vote. Make your voice heard.
Yes, that's the message we need to send out. Go vote. And so for those who will be watching this on YouTube, Next Door Neighbor, all my different channels that I operate on, please exercise your right to vote. Do it. I'm a military guy, and I know what I fought for. I fought for your right to go out there and vote. So please go out there and vote. And thank you so much, Palm Bay, Brevard County. All those who are watching, go watch the presidential debate. That's the order. Have fun, get your popcorn out, and have a good night. Thank you.
Good night.